I wanted to share some of my thoughts on so-called pickup artist and the PUA movement. It's really nothing new. There have been books written about the art of seduction at least since the time of Ovid, and even much earlier, I'm sure. But focusing on modern times, it seems like the PUA community really gained a lot of popular attention, especially through the 2000s, and I think the book, The Game, was largely responsible for that. I was in my early 20s when I first saw the book in a little shop in an airport. I was looking for something to read on my flight, and this book caught my attention. I flipped through it, and it looked really interesting, so I bought it. And I remember feeling a little embarrassed or ashamed to buy it or be seen reading it. I was still living with my parents then, and I remember feeling kind of worried about my mother finding it. The book wasn't a pickup manual, per se. It was the story of a journalist and author who decided to investigate the pickup artist community, sort of enter into that world and write about his experiences. And just as a story, it's actually pretty good. It was very well written. The protagonist, or narrator, is very relatable and goes through an interesting character arc. I'm a little surprised it was never made into a movie, honestly. But even though it's not exactly a pickup manual, of course it does reveal different lines and techniques that different pickup artists used. And I'm sure a lot of guys read the book and immediately went out and tried those lines and techniques. And of course, many of the pickup artists mentioned in the book had books and other products to sell. Some of them even offered in-field boot camps, where they would take guys out to clubs or other target-rich environments for a hands-on learning experience. And to be honest with you, I got really into this whole thing for a few years. I think I ordered just about every pickup guru's course, and I even did one of the in-field weekend boot camps. And I was pretty dedicated to mastering the craft, and I think it's fair to say that I did get pretty good and had quite a bit of success. So even though this is a little bit different from the kinds of topics I normally discuss, I thought it might be worthwhile to share some of my reflections and experiences, as well as some of my current thoughts on the subject. First of all, I really don't like the term pickup artist, and I never thought of myself as one. I'm a man. It's very natural for a man to be attracted to women. And learning how to approach women, get to know them, seduce them, and create a healthy relationship with them is just part of what it means to be a man. And of course, to fulfill your biological purpose as the male of the species. And as I see it, learning to be attractive to women is really just learning to be a real man. The things that make a male a real man are the same things that make a man attractive to women. So the quest to become good with women is really just the quest to discover authentic masculinity and to become a real man. I think that a lot of people who have mainstream social values would say that a major part of what it means to be a real man has to do with getting married and taking on the responsibility of starting a family. It goes without saying that the only way a man can do that is if he's able to meet and attract a woman. And yet these same people, with their mainstream social values, will try to shame men for trying to learn how to meet and attract women. This shaming seems to have actually gotten much worse over the last several years. And I see that as a part of the sickness that has infected our society. And it's a little ironic to me that a lot of the shaming of male sexuality is coming from the left. Liberals used to be all about sexual liberation. They used to be against Victorian puritanical attitudes towards sexuality, or the idea that sex is somehow sinful or something to be ashamed of. But it's also ironic to me that conservatives would shame men for trying to learn to be successful at meeting and attracting women. Like I said, obviously a man will not be able to get married and start a family unless he's able to meet and attract a woman. And conservatives are supposed to support traditional marriage and family values. I'm fairly conservative on a lot of issues, And I believe traditional family values are absolutely essential to the health of a society. I believe those traditional values are a vital part of what has made Western society as successful as it's been. And I see the ongoing decline of Western society as being directly related to the ongoing decay of traditional Western values. And so I believe that if the West is going to be saved, a major part of the solution has to involve men rediscovering authentic masculinity and becoming real men. And yes, learning to be good with women is absolutely central to that, for the simple and obvious reasons I've given. Again, I don't like the term pickup artist, but if we think about what a pickup artist is, he's basically a man who has learned the art of picking up women. And the term picking up women honestly makes me cringe. There seems to be a lot of stigma attached to picking up women, and I think this has to do with the shaming of masculinity and male sexuality. But let's think about what it actually means to pick up a woman. Really, it just means that a man sees a woman he's attracted to, he approaches her and starts a conversation with her, and this will probably involve expressing his interest in her. It will probably involve him trying to display some of his most attractive qualities to her in order to get her to feel interested in him and see him as the kind of man she would want to have a romantic, sexual relationship with. And exactly what this means will obviously depend on what he's looking for. If he's looking for a wife or girlfriend, he'll try to present himself as someone who would be a good potential husband or boyfriend. If he's looking for a more casual relationship, then he'll try to present himself as someone who would be fun to have a more casual relationship with. If the interaction goes well, and he's successful at making a good impression on her, and getting her interested in him and in taking the interaction further, he'll probably ask her for her number or ask her out. In some cases, he may invite her to go back to his place or his hotel room or whatever. Whatever the case may be, she will either be receptive and accept his proposition, or she'll say no. If she's not receptive, she'll probably say she has a boyfriend, whether she actually does or not. And if he hasn't been creepy or obnoxious, she'll probably be pretty nice about it, even if she rejects him. That's pretty much what a pickup looks like. It's actually pretty simple and perfectly normal. But depending on how you handle the interaction, it could be really awkward or go very badly. And this is why guys are interested in learning pickup lines or pickup techniques. Again, these kinds of terms make me cringe. But if we really think about what we're talking about, there's not actually anything cringy about it. A lot of pickup artists like to talk about openers instead of pickup lines. Basically, we're just talking about what you say when you first approach a woman that you're interested in order to get her attention and hopefully start a pleasant interaction with her. What most people think of as pickup lines are absolutely horrible and are virtually guaranteed to result in an unsuccessful and probably very embarrassing approach. Like I said, as I was learning to approach women, I read pretty much every pickup guru's system and tried pretty much every possible kind of approach. You can pretty much divide them all into just a few categories. I would say the two major categories are direct and indirect. A direct approach would be basically just approaching a woman, getting her attention, expressing your interest and being clear about your intentions, maybe giving her a compliment, introducing yourself, and then seeing if she's open to continuing the interaction. That's more or less what I described earlier. For some reason, this seems absolutely terrifying to most guys. It used to be terrifying for me too. And I understand that currently, there's sort of a weird social and political climate where basically if you even look at a woman or smile at her without her written consent, this is considered sexual harassment. And so I understand why a lot of guys are a little paranoid about flirting with girls these days. But the truth is, even without all that weirdness, most guys would still be afraid to approach women. And so that isn't really the reason. It's just an excuse. If you approach women right and have some common sense about it, none of that stuff actually matters. The only places where any of that is realistically an issue anyway is on college campuses or in the workplace. And as a general rule, I don't think it's a good idea to date coworkers anyway. I recommend keeping your work and personal life separate. I think the reason a lot of guys are tempted to date coworkers is because they're not good at meeting women. They're too scared to go talk to the girl at the grocery store or whatever. So with female coworkers, they probably have interactions with them every day. Of course, those interactions are professional and non-sexual, but they may be friendly. And so the ice is already broken, and it may seem less stressful than approaching a complete stranger and trying to break the ice. But in reality, it's way more risky. I just don't recommend trying to date coworkers. There are plenty of other women out there that you don't work with. As far as college campuses, if you're a college student, your college campus would probably be one of the best possible places to meet girls if it weren't for the current climate on college campuses. It's been quite a few years since I've attended college, so I haven't personally experienced this, but I've heard a lot of people talk about their experiences. I personally met a lot of girls when I was in college, but I'm not sure that I can offer advice to younger guys who are in college now. You might be better off not talking to girls you go to school with. I think that's really sad, but maybe that's just the way it is right now. As long as you have common sense and use a certain amount of caution, though, I think you're probably going to be fine approaching girls on your college campus, as long as you know how to approach them right. The majority of college girls are not purple-haired, man-hating feminist lesbians. And you can probably easily spot the ones who are. Those are probably not the ones you would want to talk to anyway. I actually think that a lot of girls go to college primarily to find a guy. Some people will argue with me on this, but just look at the majors that girls tend to choose. It's obvious that a lot of them aren't really thinking in terms of starting a career. Some of them are. I'm not saying that the only reason any girl goes to college is to find a guy to marry, but I think it is at least one of the major reasons for many of them. If the guy is going to college, especially if he's a senior and about to graduate, she thinks he's going to be starting a career, earning a decent income, and that he's going to be in a position to provide for her and their future children. Even if she is primarily going there to get her MBA or engineering degree, she's probably also hoping to meet a good guy. As long as you approach the right girls and you approach them right, I think it's probably still easy to meet girls on a college campus. But I think a lot of guys make the mistake of trying to flirt with the girl who sits by them in class. I've done that, and there's nothing wrong with it, but I think it's better to talk to girls you see in the hallway, but don't share a class with. It's just much less likely to be awkward. Once you've learned how to talk to women, you can probably flirt with the cute girl in your humanities class, or even the receptionist at work. But while you're learning, and making those inevitable mistakes along the way, I think it's best to talk to women you'll probably never see again, or at least who you don't have to be around all the time. Also, if you know you may never get another chance to talk to her, it gives you a little more of a sense of urgency and forces you to overcome your fear and hesitation and be direct. Don't misunderstand me when I say a sense of urgency. I only mean that you have the sense that if you don't go for it now, you may never get another chance. I don't mean that you should act like it's a big deal or give her the impression that you feel any sense of urgency. It's just that, by chance, you ended up at the same place at the same time. She caught your eye, and just by the way she looks, or the way she presents and carries herself, or just by the energy she puts out, you get the feeling that she seems like the kind of woman you would enjoy getting to know. And unless you go say hi and introduce yourself, you may never see her again, and you'll never have the chance to find out. And if you don't know what to say to her, try just telling her something basically like that. Then introduce yourself, ask her name, and see if she seems open to having a conversation. From there, just ask her where she's from, what she does, and normal stuff like that. I'll talk more about my approach and some more specific advice later, but before I get into depth, I should probably talk about the indirect approach. Because most guys don't have the balls to try a direct approach with a total stranger, they usually end up using an indirect approach with a female they're familiar with. This is why a lot of guys try to flirt with female coworkers or the girl who sits in front of them in class, or their waitress or something like that. It feels less awkward to them, but it's actually much more likely to be awkward and much more likely to lead to some sort of sexual harassment claim or something like that. If you understand how to do it right, it probably won't be awkward or get you in any kind of trouble. But most guys don't know how to do it right. And so I'll talk about that too, and give some examples from my own experiences with both direct and indirect approaches. I favor direct approaches, and I think that doing a lot of direct approaches is the best way to get better at talking to women. And once you're better at talking to women, you're more likely to be able to do an indirect approach without making things awkward or coming across as creepy. A lot of pickup gurus were teaching some form of indirect game back when I first discovered the PUA community. Some of their methods were pretty complicated and also pretty weird. For example, they would recommend approaching a girl or a group of people that the girl you wanted to talk to was in, and ask her or them for their opinion about something. They might say, "Hey guys, let me ask your opinion about something real quick. Who do you think lies more, men or women?" The idea was basically to start a conversation and maybe have some playful banter with the girl or with her group without actually expressing any interest in the girl. Maybe you would playfully tease the girl to make it seem like you're not trying to hit on her in order to disarm her and her friends. I used this kind of approach quite a few times, and it's not necessarily bad, but to me it's a little bit weird to walk up to a random girl or a random group of people and ask them for their opinion about something random. Of course, there are ways of doing it that will make it seem less weird, but it's still a little weird. If you do it right, it won't seem weird, but it actually takes some time and practice to learn how to do this kind of approach right. And that's only the first step. All that step accomplishes, even if you do it right, is it breaks the ice with a stranger or group of strangers at a bar or club. If you do it wrong, then they're going to be looking at each other like, who is this guy and why is he asking us some random question? Plus, at this point, a lot of people know about pickup artists using opinion openers, so they might be thinking, oh great, one of those pickup artist guys. But once you've successfully opened the set, or once you've started a conversation with a group of strangers without making it really awkward or completely embarrassing yourself, you still have a long way to go before you actually pick up the girl you wanted to talk to. Depending on the pickup guru, the number of steps and the order they go in varies somewhat. But after the opener, you need some kind of transition. If you ask them their opinion about something, and they tell you their opinion, then you need something else to keep the interaction going. Otherwise, they're going to wonder why you're still there. So maybe you change the topic or show them something really cool or lead into some kind of story. The point of this is usually to demonstrate value, or in other words, to show them that you're an interesting person so they'll want to keep talking to you. But of course, the goal is to do this without making it seem like you're bragging about yourself or seeking their approval, even though you kind of are, because that would only make you look uncool and unattractive. So obviously that's not an easy task, and it takes a while to learn how to do it right. Even if you do it right, at best, the girl is kind of interested in you now, but you still have a long way to go. For a lot of the pickup artists, the goal was basically to get the girl to show some kind of interest in you first, in the form of maybe asking you a question or maybe trying to seek your attention or approval in some way. The goal is basically to get her interested in you before expressing your interest in her, and then to make her prove herself to you or work for your attention and approval. Then at that point, you can reward her by showing signs of interest and getting to know her. Of course, if she's in a group, that will probably involve separating her from her friends and going with you to the bar or somewhere else. At that point, you could run into problems, because she might feel bad about leaving her friends that she's there with, so you have to deal with that somehow. Or maybe she's there with just one girlfriend, and her friend isn't going to like you stealing her friend away and leaving her there all alone, so you'll have to deal with that. Or maybe there's a guy in the group who likes her and gets jealous, so he starts causing problems, and so you have to deal with that. So there's a lot of steps you have to learn to do correctly, and there's a lot of potential problems and obstacles that you'll have to learn to deal with if you're going to meet girls with this kind of indirect approach. And after all that, maybe you get her number. But she doesn't really remember you because she was drunk, or she just flakes on you for whatever reason and doesn't call or text you back. Or you ask her out, but she says she's busy. Granted, that could happen with a cold, direct approach with a woman you meet in line at the coffee shop or whatever too. But at least you wouldn't have invested nearly as much energy into getting her number or whatever. On the other hand, maybe you end up taking her home with you, or going home with her that night. My experience has been that when that happens, it usually ends up being a one-night stand. And this seems to be a lot of other people's experience too. And of course, if you have a one-night stand with a girl you met at a bar who's been drinking, and she regrets having sex with you later, you may end up being accused of rape. Of course, you could also end up with an STD. Personally, I don't really recommend going out and looking for one-night stands. I don't think that's going to make you happy. And a lot of times, having sex with someone too soon ends up ruining any possibility of having a real relationship with them. In spite of negative stereotypes about men only wanting one thing, virtually every guy I've ever known wants a good girl to have a relationship with. And ironically, based on my observations and experiences, most so-called players are actually horrible with women. That might seem counterintuitive to a lot of people, but let me explain. Contrary to the stereotype, most of these so-called players don't actually know how to meet women. Or at least they don't know how to meet and attract the kind of women they actually want. So they get really desperate and hit on women they're not attracted to. Since he doesn't understand how to actually meet and attract a woman, he thinks that the way to get a woman in bed is to convince her that you really like her and want a relationship with her, even though you really don't. Of course, after he gets off, he isn't desperate and horny anymore, so he doesn't want anything to do with her, because he was never really attracted to her in the first place. There's something I need to clarify here. I'm not saying that only unattractive women get played. Very attractive women get played too, but they usually get played by higher status men who don't know how to meet and attract higher status women, so they use lower status women for sex. Personally, I don't consider a rich or famous person to have more intrinsic worth than a regular person. But we're all aware that there is a socially constructed status hierarchy. If a woman is very physically attractive, she will be more high status than a less attractive woman. And if a man is rich and powerful, he will be more high status than a man with less wealth and power. A player who has fairly low status probably usually has to go for women who are extremely low status. Most low status players, in other words, low status males who aren't good at meeting and attracting the women they want, basically sleep with a lot of women who are fat, ugly, and undesirable to most men. But even though these players are fairly low status, they're still probably higher status than the men who may actually be attracted to these women. The same basic principle applies to high status players, though, I think. For example, a professional athlete or a TV star will be perceived as very high status by a lot of women. And a lot of those women would even be seen as high status or highly attractive by a lot of lower status guys. They're a lot more attractive than the women that they're able to date, but they're still perceived as lower status by the professional athlete or TV star. He doesn't consider her desirable, but he isn't able to meet and attract the women that he does consider desirable. So he's desperate, and he takes advantage of women who have lower status than he does. The reason a lot of women complain that there are so many players out there is that a lot of women are hypergamous. In other words, a lot of women, probably the majority of women, chase after guys who have higher status than they do. A girl who works as a waitress usually doesn't want to date a guy who works as a waiter. She thinks she deserves a guy who is a middle or upper level manager for some company. But why does he want a waitress? Sure, he'll use her for sex, especially if he doesn't know how to attract a woman that he's actually attracted to, who is closer to him in terms of social status. But he is less likely to actually be interested in something serious with her. A guy who's closer to her in terms of status would probably love her and treat her like a princess. Of course, the reasonably attractive guy who works as a waiter at the same restaurant she does doesn't know how to meet and attract women. If he learned to be more confident and masculine, and she learned to be less hypergamous, they'd probably be happy together. This is probably kind of a tangent, and I don't want to get too far away from the main topic, but I see these two things as related. I do think that hypergamy is just a part of female nature. But I also think that a lot of the guys who complain about female hypergamy and say that women are gold diggers just don't know how to approach women. So that's their excuse for not being able to get a girlfriend. Again, I do agree that women tend to be hypergamous. But I also know that I've dated some very attractive, high-status women. And I've always been pretty close to the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Granted, I've always been pretty lean and muscular, and that does count for something. But I'm also only average height, and we all know that most girls say that they're only interested in dating guys who are 6 feet tall or whatever. And even though I think I'm reasonably attractive, I'm not Ryan Reynolds or anything. But in any case, I'm a low-status guy. For a little while, I was driving a taxi, part-time, and I lived with my parents. And I dated 2 beautiful young models. Not at the same time, if anyone's wondering. And both of them lived in a much nicer part of town than I did. And both of them were definitely much more physically attractive than I was. So yes, women do tend to be hypergamous by nature. But if you're a low-status guy, that isn't the reason that you can't attract the women you want. The reason you can't attract the women you want is because you aren't confident enough to approach them, and because you never learned how to be a real man. And most other guys have the same problem. So the only men who are approaching these women are the higher status guys who view them as lower status, and who only want to use them for sex. And I know some MRA or MGTOW is going to say that I'm white knighting or that I'm blaming men for female hypergamy. But what's their explanation for why I got a beautiful girlfriend back when I was unemployed and living with my parents? I honestly believe that if more men learned how to approach and seduce the women they're actually attracted to, but too scared to go talk to, a lot more women would be with those men. instead of acting on their hypergamous instincts and chasing higher status men who don't really value them. I honestly believe that it's best for both men and women to date or marry someone who is roughly equal with them in terms of socioeconomic status. Pythagoras argued for this view too, and I've talked about that in my video about Pythagoreanism and feminism. There's a lot of good reasons why Pythagoras believed and promoted this view, but I don't think it's ultimately very productive for men to get on the internet and vent about toxic femininity or female nature. I think there's much more value in them getting in touch with their own authentic masculine nature. The masculine principle is active and generative. The feminine principle is passive and receptive. The feminine responds to the masculine. And so if there's an imbalance in the masculine and feminine energies within a society, and I believe there is in modern Western society, then the imbalance we see in the feminine principle is a response to an imbalance in the masculine principle. And only by correcting the deficiency in the masculine principle can we correct the excesses in the feminine principle. And unless we do that, Western society will collapse. And that's one of the reasons I've chosen to address this topic. And I have a lot more to say about it. But this is turning into a longer video than I initially planned, so I'm going to end here for now and continue the discussion in part 2, where I'll share some more of my experiences, observations, and insights. So if you haven't already, subscribe and stay tuned for part 2, and hit the thumbs up button to let me know that you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on this topic. See you next time. Peace.